Hi, everyone. Today we're going to be turning the corner, leaving part three of the class, and turn our attention to the fourth part of the class, looking at the role of institutions in social life. So at this point, hopefully we recognize the connections between culture and social psychology. If you think back to what we've been looking at, we see how culture is very influential on developing one's social psychological ways. Often our social psychology is a direct or indirect reflection of our culture socialization. But likewise, we can see how, with our agency, with our free will, we can think and act in our ways that perhaps go against culture or perhaps more about subcultures and dominant cultures. So it's a two-way street. We use culture to navigate our social lives, and culture basically provides those directions to us, what to do, what not to do. So now we can ask two more questions related to part four of the class. The first question being, how is culture produced? So if culture is so important because it shapes our social life, and shapes our social psychological ways, where does it come from? And then we can ask, where do people internalize this culture? Where do people make it part of their social psychology? So answering both questions, we can turn our attention to part four of the class, the institutional foundations of society. So let me start by basically conceptualizing institutions. Like culture, when we say institutions, sometimes we know what we're saying, but we really don't carry a strong definition for it. So here we can recognize institutions as being a sphere of social life that's organized to meet certain human needs. So there's two kind of parts to this. One part is it's organized. So every institution is organized. And then also the institution serves specific functions for society members. So, major institutions that make up all societies, family, culture, media, economy, government, sport. So again, all countries, all societies have institutions, although the institutions may be arranged differently compared to one place or another. And so, with that said, recognizing kind of the organization within institutions, they also provide a specific need. And so, for the family, the organization is about parent-child relationships, sibling relationships, and how all those different relationships carry kind of roles and responsibilities. And so, in addition to the organization of the family, the function of it is to provide care and nourishment to individuals. And so, there'll be more kind of functions as well, but there's just a couple connected to the family. Religion, again, depending upon the specific religion, it's organized in certain ways, who does what, who assists whom. And then the function of religion provides people understandings of the unknown, things you can't maybe answer by simply observing something or studying it scientifically. Religion kind of serves that function for people. The media provides a function of providing both entertainment and information to society members. And again, media as an institution is organized. You have the writers, you have the directors, you have those kind of on film in front of the cameras. So again, everybody has to kind of do their part for the institution to operate successfully. The economy is there to help with the production of goods and the consumption of goods. And again, the economy is set up in terms of organization as well. And then government provides law and order. And again, we see government being organized from very local levels to a national level government representatives. So institutions are an organized sphere of life, and the organization is there to serve a specific function for society as a whole. And so now we can get this back to our course framework, kind of recognizing what an institution is, what an institution does. We can recognize that institutions do a couple important things. First, they provide a social space in which people encounter and learn culture. So it could be a space of a family room, some type of religious service space, a playing field. So again, the space provided by the institution, the field, the religious space, the family room, provides us a space in which we encounter culture. You have people within those spaces, whether it be a parent, a priest, a coach, and basically kind of helping us in the teaching and learning process of cultural ways. So, with that understood, we can say two things. We can say that with reference to our course framework, the institutions of society produce the culture society as a whole. So again, although the culture being produced may differ from one society to another, in every society, it's the institutions in the society that are producing the cultural ways, the schools, the families, the government, the media. And in addition, we can recognize that here is where we're being taught formally, kind of directly taught lessons, or informally, kind of picking up cultural ways along the way. So here is where we're making that connection to our social psychology. So here we start to connect the dots among the three dimensions. The institution produces culture. The institution provides us the spaces in which we make culture part of our social psychology. So another function we can say is institutions also organize relationships around social factors. Excuse me. So, what locker room you go into based upon your sex, which restrooms you use based upon your sex, how much you pay in taxes based upon your class background. Um, are you eligible for certain scholarships, for certain aid based upon your race? Are you eligible to vote, to drink alcohol, so on and so on, based upon your age? So what institutions do, they use all these social characteristics that we possess to put us within the institution, whether it be our age, our class, so on and so on. So again, here we can start to see the interconnection among the three. Institutions producing the culture, linking institutions to culture, and then institutions providing spaces for socialization, linking institutions to our social psychology. So everything starts to come together. And so the order of the framework in terms of how we teach and learn it in my class, it's arbitrary. We could start with institutions at the beginning of the semester, and we could end with culture. But to me, this makes most sense, ending the semester with institutions, because on the one hand, sometimes we don't see the influence that institutions have on us. We're so used to it, we don't kind of recognize that on a day-to-day basis. Basically, we're jumping around from one institution to another. You wake up perhaps in the institution of the family, and then you go to the institution of education, and then you go to the institution of work, and then you go to you interact with the institution of media. So again, kind of along the way, basically what you're doing throughout your daily life is bouncing around from one institution to another. And with each bounce around, you're being exposed to certain cultural ways, making those cultural ways part of your social psychology. So I save it for the last part of the class to make us kind of more aware of institutions in our life, but also kind of connect the dots all together with our course framework. And so we can turn our attention to the Chapkiss chapter that you read for today. So basically, I'm going to approach this historically and look at this question of, how does marijuana, change its meaning from being seen as one thing to another? And we'll say the changing of meaning, kind of the changing culture surrounding marijuana as medicine, is a direct result of institutional changes. When institutions change, culture changes. When culture changes, so does one's social psychology as a result. So basically what I have up here, a couple of different categories connected to different characteristics we can look at historically speaking. And the two different histories I'll talk about, we can label the first, the earlier history, as being kind of the pre-demonization stage of marijuana as medicine. And then we can look at the demonization stage, kind of a more recent history in terms of how it becomes perceived as kind of the demon drug. So going back to the earlier history, pre-demonization, we can say that ideas of doctors and medicine were fuzzy ideas, fuzzy concepts. In other words, anybody who practiced medicine could do it. If they had kind of the training and the experience. You could be a parent, you could be, some type of family member, You could be, somebody of the community that people look towards to, go to deal with some type of health issue. And you didn't need any type of certificate. You didn't need any type of formal education. And basically, you're still considered somebody who practiced medicine, and not only had kind of informal practitioners like midwives, shaman, shaw women, but again, there's people within the community who earn the trust of their fellow community members that people will go to with health issues. And the same thing was true with medicine, very fuzzy in terms of what's considered a medicine, what is not. Basically, anything under the sun could be used as a medicine if somebody practiced it or somebody wanted to use it. So again, today we'll talk about how it's different. But back then, we didn't have this idea of a doctor with a uppercase D or medicine with an uppercase M. Both were very fuzzy concepts, and basically you didn't have strict rules of what was, what wasn't medicine, who was not doctors. That will come later. So the value of marijuana as a medicine in this earlier history, it carried high value. People thought it was very worthwhile as a medicine. And if you kind of went through the chapter, you see all the symptoms that people would treat with cannabis, with marijuana. Basically, everything from headaches, baldness, breathing issues, anxiety issues, down to, problems with one's feet, from head to toe, basically, people would use cannabis as a medicine to treat their symptoms. And so it carried high value with it because people used it often and they'd use it for many different things. And so at this time, it was recognized that some people maybe used it when they maybe didn't need to use it medically speaking, or perhaps they were overusing the medicine. And this kind of stereotypical user carried a connotation of basically kind of the bored housewife, a white middle class woman at this time. And they were connected to the stereotypical kind of user, perhaps overuser of cannabis, marijuana. And so that was kind of recognized as not somebody who had kind of criminal problems, but more likely somebody who had addiction problems. So it's seen as a medical issue more than a criminal issue. So that's kind of the earlier history. And now we start to see a different history emerging, and everything becomes redefined. So the first kind of reconceptualization has to do with doctors of medicine. Rather than the fuzzy concepts, to become very formalized. You have to have these labels, these credentials to be the doctor, to be used lawfully as a medicine. And so that really kind of changes the game in two ways: who is actually allowed to practice, who is not. Basically, women were kind of marginalized out of the game because they weren't allowed to go to the schools and receive the proper training at the time to become doctors or to be somebody who could practice medicine legitimately. And then also the types of medicine used basically changed. You had to be on the list in terms of the approved kind of medical board approved forms of medicine that you can use. All other medicines were seen as not legitimate medicines, things that really didn't help people out, and perhaps actually did more harm than good. And that kind of gets into marijuana. Marijuana was not only kind of left off the list of legitimate medicines during this change, but it was kind of demonized, seen as having no value at all. And again, this isn't, these changes don't happen overnight. It takes time and energy. But when you start to kind of redefine the medicine as being illegal, bad for people, then eventually the culture begins to redefine it as being bad rather than carrying high value. So also you start to see a change that kind of falls in line with this. The demonization of medical marijuana comes with a reconceptualizing the user. So the user no longer, stereotypically speaking, is that kind of bored housewife who has an addiction issue, a health problem. But now the use of marijuana is now associated with racial minorities from lower class backgrounds. And again, these people are not seen like the women were in the past as having health problems, addiction issues, but rather they're being deemed as criminals, seen as social problems. So again, this all kind of falls in line. If you want people to start to redefine something in a negative way, you need to be compatible with your understandings of it. And so the bored housewife doesn't really scare too many people. But if you associate the drug with criminals, people from racial minority, lower class backgrounds, then you're more likely to invoke fear, especially in kind of middle class America. So overall, we start to see kind of the two different institutions in play for today, government and medicine, as our two institutions that change that culture. They redefine kind of the what and the who in terms of practicing medicine. They change the value associated with using marijuana as a medicine. What was seen before as having high value is changed to have no value, perhaps even do damage to you. And then you change the idea of the user to kind of fit that more negative image that you're trying to create with respect to medical marijuana usage. And so basically you start to see, if you think about a course framework, the institutions change, then you change the culture specifically how you define the usefulness of medical marijuana. And then when you change that, you start to change people's minds as well. The institutions change, the culture change, so does the social psychology. But again, it doesn't always happen overnight. It takes time for culture to change. It takes time for people's social psychologies to adapt to the new cultural ways. So what you saw here, kind of outside medicine and government, people brought in other institutions to get their message across. Not everybody follows politics and kind of lawmaking on a daily basis. Not everybody reads the medical journals. So basically, what happened is you tried your best within medicine to make sure it was kind of framed as something negative. You stopped letting people do research on it so they couldn't contradict what you want them to say or what you want to say about it. So you won't give anybody the chance to say that actually marijuana is good for you, is beneficial as a drug, because you simply outlaw the research on it. Likewise, any doctors who would say marijuana is useful, you kind of stigmatize them. They say they're quacks, they're not real doctors, because if they were real doctors, they wouldn't be advocating for medical marijuana. But also you bring in other institutions, such as education, where you kind of start to have different programs within schools, such as DARE, to kind of tell people that these drugs are bad. And then also you use media. So if you watch these films that were kind of very kind of intentionally propaganda to kind of portray marijuana use in a very negative way, these films we'll laugh at today. And we laugh at them today because they just come across as silly. But back then, people actually took them seriously. They weren't laughing at anything. They saw a real social problem that needed to be addressed. So you bring in the media, you bring in schools to help you kind of get the culture you want to get out there. And then you slowly but surely start to change the social psychology behind it. So today, you're probably thinking about this as you read the article or as you're kind of going through the lecture with me. The culture has changed again. Slowly but surely, you start to see more and more people okay with marijuana use, medically speaking, socially speaking. And we're not saying that more people are using it, but more people say, hey, it's not for me. I'm not going to use it. But if other people want to, they should have that option. And we see kind of more and more kind of changes of law, decriminalizing the use, legalizing the use. And so again, how is this going on? How did the social psychology start to change? Well, we can say the culture started to change too. So when we start to have more people in favor of it, then you start to get the culture changed and people change their minds as a result. But again, the institutions have to be kind of the first step if you follow our course framework. So you look at certain institutions such as media. So media, especially when I was kind of younger, started to portray marijuana as not like this demon drug, but something that when used carefully, smartly, you can be seen like any other kind of legalized drugs such as coffee or alcohol. You don't want to drink too much coffee or alcohol, it'll make you sick. And marijuana, you don't want to use too much of it, it can make you sick. But if you can use a little bit of it, you can maybe have a good time doing it. doing that. Thinking about some television shows like that 70s show, Days to Confuse, feature film. These are different shows and films I was exposed to, and it kind of contradicted the negative kind of imagery attached to the drug when I was younger. So media started to play a role in this. So did the economy. The economy started to recognize marijuana as being a potential tax-based booster. And so the economy starts to see it as beneficial rather than a drag on it. The culture begins to change. It can be beneficial for us if you use it correctly in terms of putting it a part of the economy. And then also we can look at the laws themselves, government. So when governments are changing their positions on it in terms of the legalization, then people will start to change their mind. If it's that bad, they wouldn't make it legal. If it's that bad, they wouldn't decriminalize it. So I guess it may not be that bad if it's legalized, if it's decriminalized. So again, the institutions, we always say, represent the starting points for the cultural changes, and the cultural changes will change the social psychologies. And this is an ongoing kind of conversation. Marijuana used to be good, then bad. Today, we see it as being positive for a couple different things, medically speaking, for the economy, for personal freedoms as a whole. So nevertheless, we'll leave that there for today, kind of looking at seeing all three parts of our course framework together, and we'll continue to make those connections throughout the rest of part 4.